The President. 質詢。
Questions. Question 1, the Honorable Frankie YICK. Thank you, President. In early years, the government granted sites and new land premium for the setting up of 12 dedicated auto-liquefied petroleum gas or LPG filling stations. They're called dedicated stations. A cap on LPG pump prices at dedicated stations is required to be set in accordance with a prescribed pricing formula. As the pump prices at dedicated stations are lower than that at non-dedicated stations, there are always long queues at dedicated stations. At present, the vast majority of taxis and about 60% of light buses are LPG fueled. In this connection, will the government inform this Council? 1. As some drivers have pointed out that the pump prices at non-dedicated stations are relatively higher, and the method for setting such prices lacks transparency, whether the government will set a cap on the pump prices at non-dedicated stations by adopting a prescribed pricing formula so as to reduce the pressure for the fares of taxis and light buses to rise. If so, of the details, if not the reasons for that too. Given that existing design, build, and operate contracts for the various dedication stations will expire one after another in 2021 or 2022, whether the government will grant leases for the sites of these stations at new land premium again, if not, of its plans to keep pump prices at a low level so as to avoid the fares of taxis and light buses rising substantially. And 3, as some Lantau taxi drivers have pointed out, that while there is no dedicated station on Lantau Island, and they therefore have to patronize non-dedicated stations at which pump prices are higher, the fare scale of Lantau taxis is the lowest among the various types of taxis, whether the government will set up dedicated stations on Lantau Island. If so, of the details, if not, its measures to alleviate those drivers' financial burden. Secretary for the Environment. President, to improve roadside air quality and protect public health, the government started planning to introduce LPG taxis and light bus in public light buses in late 1990s. As LPG auto refilling network was non-existent at that time, the government had to expeditiously set up one with reasonable coverage for launching the LPG vehicle scheme. To this end, the government set up dedicated LPG filling stations or dedicated stations at 12 locations in the urban areas and granted them zero land premium to operators. In return, the LPG pump prices at dedicated stations are governed by a pricing formula, the operation contract signed between the respective operators and the government to ensure they are at a competitive level among auto fuel prices. On the other hand, the government encouraged oil companies to provide LPG filling facilities at the existing or new petrol filling stations, and i.e. non-dedicated LPG stations, to expand the LPG filling network progressively. In this regard, the government adopted in the year 2000 a policy to require new petrol filling stations under the land sales program to provide LPG filling facilities subject to safety requirements being met. In 2011, LPG filling stations are required to provide LPG filling nozzles at a number of not less than 25% of the total number of petrol, diesel, and LPG nozzles at the station subject to safety requirements being met. There are now 490 LPG filling nozzles, including 190 at 12 dedicated stations and 300 at 56 non-dedicated stations throughout Hong Kong, with 90 nozzles installed on Hong Kong Island and 400 in Kowloon, and the NT, of which 20 are installed in the non-dedicated stations on Lantau. My specific responses to the question raised by the Honorable Frankie YICK are as follows. 1. The LPG ceiling prices of the dedicated stations are set in accordance with the established formula stipulated in the operation contracts signed between the government and the operators, which are regulated by the EMSD. The pricing formula makes reference to two key elements, namely the LPG international price and operating cost. The LPG international price refers to the LPG international price of the preceding month, while the operating cost is adjusted on the first day of February every year based on a change in the composite consumer price index of the previous year. The dedicated stations follow this mechanism to set the LPG ceiling prices on a monthly basis. The MSD announces the LPG international prices and the LPG ceiling prices of dedicated stations through press releases and posts the relevant information on its website for the reference of the public and the trades. For non-dedicated stations, the operators are awarded land grants through open tender, and all companies will set their own retail price of auto fuels, including LPG, on a commercial basis. Unlike the dedicated stations, which were offered at zero land premium, it is difficult for us to require the non-dedicated stations to follow the LPG price adjustment mechanism of the dedicated stations. Nonetheless, operators of the non-dedicated stations would consider the LPG prices of the dedicated stations when setting their own LPG prices to remain competitive. 2. The LPG filling network, comprising both dedicated and non-dedicated stations, is extremely important as it is an essential infrastructure supporting the operation of about 18,000 LPG taxis and 4,500 LPG light buses at present. Since the contracts of the 12 dedicated stations will expire from February 2021 to December 2022 in phases, the government will review the operation of the LPG filling network and its demand and consider the future arrangement for the dedicated stations before the expiry of these contracts. 3. The LPG filling network has a comprehensive network covering the whole of Hong Kong. The government has no plan to establish additional dedicated stations, but will continue at this stage to further expand the coverage of such by stipulating conditions through tendering of petrol filling stations requiring the installation of LPG filling nozzles subject to safety requirements being met. There are now 4 non-dedicated stations on Lantau, of which 3 are in Tung Chung and 1 at Chat Lap Kok, providing a total of 20 LPG filling nozzles. They are sufficient to meet the demand of refilling service of 75 Lantau LPG taxis and 6 LPG green minibuses operating in the area. According to the Lantau LPG filling station operators, as Lantau is far away from the LPG depots, the transportation cost is higher, and there are also fewer LPG vehicles refilling in the area. Thus, the station's operating costs are apparently different from those in other areas, and it is difficult to make a direct comparison in gas prices. However, when processing the fare adjustment applications for taxis and green minibus, the government has been considering and assessing various relevant factors such as operating costs, including fuel costs and revenue. Thank you, President. Mr. Frankie YICK. Thank you. The Secretary told us about the number of nozzles we have, but he didn't respond to the question about operating costs. Now, for LPG taxis and most public light buses, they rely on LPG. For the dedicated prices, they are 25 to 45% lower than that of non-dedicated stations. And most taxis and minibuses would go for dedicated stations, and therefore we always see long queues outside dedicated stations. This would affect traffic, and when during the period of change of shift, we have a reduction in the number of taxis to serve the public. Maybe this is not relevant to your bureau, but Secretary will consider discussing with THB to ensure that for new non-dedicated filling stations, the pump prices must be set in accordance with the formula of dedicated stations to ensure that the waiting time by commercial drivers will be substantially shortened when they seek refilling. As said in my main reply, for the non-dedicated stations, they obtained land through open tender, and oil companies have to operate on commercial basis in setting the prices of gases available at their stations. Of course, they will take reference from the LPG prices of the dedicated stations to ensure competitiveness. We have sufficient filling stations in our network to meet the demand from LPG taxis and PLBs. In the past 10 years, LPG prices of dedicated stations are around 36% of the petrol prices, and the non-dedicated stations have to be competitive. Whether we talk about non-dedicated or dedicated stations, prices have to be competitiveness so that the business can be viable. So we'll maintain this approach. However, whether it be through the member or the trade, perhaps taxis can give regard to the overall situation in Hong Kong and make appropriate arrangements in their refilling activities so as to seek relief. Mr. Yick, question answered. My question was about how to control operating costs, but he kept saying that there are filling stations available. Do you have anything to add, Secretary? I have none. Mr. Chan Kim-po, according to the reply, in 2011, it is required that LPG filling nozzles at a number of not less than 25% of the total number of petrol, diesel, and LPG nozzles at the station, but that was already in 2011. Will the administration consider increasing that figure to, say, 30%? Secretary, thank you for your follow-up question. Now, we are working on two fronts. For dedicated stations, their contract would expire in between February 2021 and December 2022 in phases. So we will review the operation and the demand of LPG filling network in Hong Kong. So we'll not just consider the arrangements for dedicated stations. We will consider things as a whole. Mr. Chung Kwok-pen, on the website of EMST, we can see that for prices at non-dedicated dedicated stations at the range of $3.30 to $3.90, and for non-dedicated stations, the cost is about $5 per liter. Now, on Lantau, most of the stations on non-dedicated stations and the usual pump prices are around $4.90. However, taxi fares of Lantau taxis are the lowest, and the income of drivers is the lowest, and yet they have to pay the most in terms of LPG. So it's hard for them to survive. So can we have dedicated stations in Lantau as well, so that the pump prices can drop to near $3 or so that they can make a living? And are there measures to control the increase in pump prices at non-dedicated stations? Thank you, Mr. Zhong, for your question. We have expressed the views of the government in our main reply. In the whole of Hong Kong, we have got non-dedicated stations, and the operators obtained land by open tender. And we have an LPG filling network covering the whole of Hong Kong. So there is not a great demand for increasing the number of dedicated stations. So when we have new tenders of non-dedicated stations, we'll increase terms and requirements so that they will provide LPG filling nozzles. In Lantau, we have 4 non-dedicated stations, 3 in Tung Chung and 1 at Chek Lap Kok. In total, they have 20 LPG filling nozzles. However, in Lantau, there are only 81 vehicles requiring LPG. So we have 20 LPG filling nozzles serving 81 vehicles. So this is the situation about demand and supply there. The operators are of the view that the cost of LPG is higher than because of transportation and the demand is relatively lower. But this is not the only way we consider this issue. When it comes to the fares of taxis and GMBs, we consider the operating costs. Now, from Lantau journeys, usually they are rather long, and therefore the taxi fares are high as a result. So we consider the issues in a holistic manner. We consider the operating costs as well as the income in setting the prices. So we believe this is a rather balanced approach. We have no intention to change for the time being. Mr. Lo Wai Kwok. Chairman, many years ago, taxis and PLBs turned from petrol to LPG. That's a good policy, which has gone a long way to improve our air quality. However, the supporting infrastructure is still insufficient after so many years, and this is frequently criticized. And the government should do its utmost to make things better. And there is also another trend for people to use electric vehicles. And the industry would like to introduce suitable electrical or battery-run taxis and public light buses. So there is a trend for public vehicles to use cleaner fuels. I'd like to ask whether the administration is coordinating so that we can have a better planning so that we will not repeat this example of having a good policy but insufficient infrastructure support. Secretary, well, this is rather a macro issue with significance because it can improve roadside air quality as well as reduce carbon emission in the long term. Commercial vehicles covering goods vehicles, taxis, public light buses, and franchised buses are the main sources of pollutants in Hong Kong. So in the long term, we should see how we can support the use of electric vehicles and new energy vehicles. This will be among the priorities of our work in the future. Still, there are challenges as to whether electrical vehicles can suit the local conditions. We have a hilly terrain and we are humid and rainy. So there's a process for such vehicles to adapt to Hong Kong. So to answer Mr. Lo's questions, simply we will have discussions in the future, and we have arranged a meeting with Mr. Lo, Mr. Yick, and also the industry to see how we can consider using the new technology in public transport. Mr. Kwok Wai-kyung, when is it most difficult for you to flag a taxi? Early in the morning, during the peak hours, and also at about 4 to 5 p.m. when the drivers change shift. Why is it so difficult? Because drivers have to queue for at least an hour outside dedicated stations to have LPG refilling. According to the sector, we have sufficient LPG filling nozzles and there is no need for more. But if taxis have to queue for more than 1 hour for LPG refilling, that means members of the public have to wait by roadsides for 1 to 2 hours before they can catch a taxi. So if the secretary insists that no more LPG filling nozzles should be added, so should members of the public continue to wait for 1 or 2 hours before they can hire a taxi at 4 or 5 every day, or should they refrain from using taxis at the time of the day? Secretary, at peak periods, taxis have to wait for a while before they can get LPG refilling. This has got nothing to do with whether we have sufficient dedicated stations. I think the crux of the matter is a large volume of taxis will focus at a peak period in the afternoon. They go to popular dedicated stations for LPG refilling at the same time. And as a result, outside these stations, taxis will have to wait longer for refilling. So we have regular meetings with the taxi trade and dedicated station operators. Will appeal to the industry to go to dedicated stations for LPG refilling at staggered hours, and they can go to not so busy stations so that we can address the concern of the public. Mr. Frankie YICK. Secretary, I think you should know 20 years ago, the taxi trade supported the government to address the problem of roadside air pollution. So they were willing to change to LPG, and the problem is resolved. But then the problem is there are limited choices for LPG taxi mix, and then they want to change to diesel. That is not allowed, so they have no choice but to continue to use LPG. So we are concerned about the long waiting time for LPG refilling and the operating cost. And you told us that you would review the operating cost of the taxi trade in considering their applications for fare adjustment. You should discuss with Mr. Frank Chen. Every time taxis apply for a fare increase, they would be rejected. So how can I ensure that my sector can be viable? So I think Mr. Yick's suggestion is I enhance communication with THB to address the concerns of the public to ensure the viability of the industry, the affordability on the part of the public, and also environmental concerns. We will consider these factors very seriously. Thank you.
Question to Mr. James To. The government has submitted to this council a bill that enables the government to surrender fugitive offenders under a one-off case-based approach to jurisdictions, including mainland China, with which Hong Kong has not entered into any long-term surrender arrangements. Earlier on, 130,000 members of the public joined a march to express strong objection to the proposed legislative amendments of the bill. And government officials of a number of countries, as well as international chambers of commerce, have expressed grave concern over the matter. On the other hand, the government conducted a public consultation that only lasted 20 days, and with the relevant bills committee yet to examine the general merits, principles, and detailed provisions of the bill or listen to public views, the government indicated on the 20th of May that it intends to give notice to the clerk to LegCo for resumption of the second reading debate on the bill on the 12th of June. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it has assessed if the hasty amendment process and inadequate public engagement will draw a backlash from various sectors of society? If it has, of the details, whether it will consider fresh withdrawing the bill so as to maintain social stability, if not, of the reasons for that. 2, as the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, or USCC, created by the United States Congress, pointed out in a report published on the 7th of May that the bill would create serious risks to the national security and economic interests of the U.S. and would potentially violate multiple key provisions of the Hong Kong Policy Act. Whether the government has assessed the impacts on U.S.-Hong Kong relations that the passage of the bill will bring about, including whether U.S. would repeal the Hong Kong Policy Act and whether that in turn would lead to adverse consequences, such as foreign enterprises moving their regional headquarters out of Hong Kong and conducting large-scale layoffs in the territory if it has assessed and the outcome is in the affirmative of the countermeasures. And 3, given that 2 years ago, some U.S. congressmen, out of their concern that the human rights and freedom in Hong Kong would be jeopardized, reintroduced the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act to the U.S. Congress, proposing the imposition of sanctions against government officials in Hong Kong and the mainland who suppress the basic freedom of Hong Kong residents, including freezing their U.S.-based assets and denying them entry into U.S., though the act was not enacted. Whether the government has assessed, upon the passage of the bill on surrendering fugitive offenders, if any U.S. congressman would reintroduce the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, and what impact such a situation will bring onto Hong Kong, if it has, of the details, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for Security. President, having consulted the panel on security of LegCo on the 15th of February, the HKSAR government submitted the Fugitive Offenders and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Amendment Bill 2019 to LegCo on the 3rd of April. The bill aims at enabling us to deal with a case of a Hong Kong resident suspected of murdering another Hong Kong resident in Taiwan and plugging the loopholes in the current regime on mutual assistance in criminal matters, including geographical restrictions and impracticable operational procedures at the same time. The legislative amendment involves the time element. We must establish a legal basis prior to the release of the suspect of the homicide, which is expected to be October this year at the earliest, so that the government can make necessary preparation for bringing the suspect to face due legal sanction. Since putting forward the proposal, the government has been explaining the proposal to various sectors of the community and listening to their views. Members of the government, including secretaries of departments and directors of bureaus, met various organizations and sectors, local and overseas chambers of commerce, foreign envoys, and local community on numerous occasions for dialogues and exchanges. From our first-hand experience, face-to-face explanation by government officials and their point-to-point responses could often help ease such worries and rectify some incorrect claims in the community. The government will continue to work hard in providing explanations to enhance the understanding of the bill among the public. My reply to the 3 parts of the question is as follows. 1. By international consensus, surrender of fugitive offenders is conducted to fight organized and cross-boundary crimes and a commonly accepted means to reduce crimes effectively. The existing FOO has made reference to the model treaty promulgated by the UN and is in line with common international practice in respect of human rights and legal procedures. Also, it has balanced the needs of both apprehending fugitive offenders and protecting human rights. With the proposed special surrender arrangements prescribed under the bill, there will only be more instead of fewer requirements for protection of the rights of the subject than under the existing FOO. With the principle of providing more instead of fewer safeguards in making special surrender arrangements and having considered the specific views and concerns expressed by the sectors, the government promulgated on the 30th May the provision of additional safeguards in the following 3 aspects. 1. Limiting the application of special surrender arrangements to the most serious offenses only by raising the threshold requirement for applicable offenses from imprisonment for more than 3 years to 7 years or above. 2. Including safeguards that are in line with common human rights protection in the activation of special surrender arrangements, such as presumption of innocence, open trial, legal representation, right to cross-examine witnesses, no coerced confession, right to appeal, etc. And the requesting party must guarantee that the effective prosecution validity period of the relevant offense has not lapsed. And 3. Enhancing protection for the interests of the surrendered persons, such as processing only requests from the central authority as opposed to the local authority of a place. Following up with the mainland, the arrangements for helping sentenced persons to serve their sentence in Hong Kong, negotiating appropriate means and arrangements for post-surrender visits, etc. The primary goals and needs of the bill are clear. To achieve such goals and needs, the government considers it necessary to proceed with the legislative process. 2. Our unique status and advantages under one country, two systems are conferred on the SAR by the Basic Law. Hong Kong is a separate customs territory and participates in such international organizations as the WTO and the APEC as a separate member. Hong Kong also establishes mutually beneficial relationships with our trading partners. Since Hong Kong's return to the motherland, the U.S. has continued to maintain and expand economic and trade ties with Hong Kong on the basis of our unique status. In terms of individual economies, the U.S. is Hong Kong's second largest merchandise trading partner, while Hong Kong is the U.S.'s 10th largest export market. For years, the U.S. has been enjoying the largest trade surplus with Hong Kong among its global trading partners, valued at $33.8 billion in 2018. Hong Kong and the U.S. also maintain close investment relations. In 2017, the U.S. was the seventh major source of inward direct investment into Hong Kong, while the U.S. was the ninth major destination of outward direct investment from Hong Kong. The latest report on the U.S.-Hong Kong Policy Act published by the U.S. Department of State in March continues to affirm this special treatment of Hong Kong. The report also stresses the fact that the U.S. continues to have deep economic and cultural interests in Hong Kong, and that cooperation between the U.S. government and the Hong Kong government remains broad and effective in many areas, providing significant benefits to the U.S. economy and homeland security. We believe that it is in the U.S. and Hong Kong's mutual interests to maintain and promote our bilateral relations. At the same time, such relations can only be maintained and developed on the premise of mutual respect and cooperation. 3. Since the reunification, Hong Kong SAR has been implementing Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong and a high degree of autonomy in accordance with the Basic Law, fully and successfully implemented the one country, two systems principle. Article 27 of the Basic Law stipulates that Hong Kong residents shall have freedom of speech, of the press, and of publication, freedom of association, of assembly, of procession, and of demonstration, and the right and freedom to form and join trade unions and to strike. Article 39 also stipulates that the provisions of the ICCPR as applied to Hong Kong shall remain in force, and they are implemented by the Hong Kong Bill of Rights Ordinance. We will not allow the illegal suppression of human rights and freedom in Hong Kong. The proposals in the bill target the fugitives who committed serious crimes and do not affect the legal rights and freedom of the individuals. On the other hand, Hong Kong's judicial independence ranks first in Asia and eighth in the world. Judges exercise judicial power independently, free from any interference. Eminent judges from other common law jurisdictions, such as the UK, Australia, and Canada, have been appointed as non-permanent judges of the Court of Final Appeal. Any case-based surrender request must fully comply with the law and relevant requirements under the arrangement and the safeguards of the rights of the individual, including the application for habeas corpus, review of the executive decisions, and judicial review. In this respect, the government and the judiciary have the duty to perform their powers and responsibilities. The Hong Kong SAR government reiterates that amending the FOO is a local legislation exercise. The internal affairs of HKSAR, to which overseas legislatures should respect. The economic and trade offices of the Hong Kong SAR in the U.S. have maintained liaison with the local politicians, government officials, businessmen, and think tank personnel, and provided explanations to ease their unnecessary worries. Thank you. Mr. James To, what is the point of order? I want the Secretary to clarify that it should be the UK instead of US. You mentioned the United States, whereas according to the speech, it should be the United Kingdom. Thank you very much. It should be UK, Australia, and Canada. Thank you. Mr. James To. Well, other countries have proved to be annoying because they have been interfering with China's internal affairs. My question is, did the government reflect to the Central People's Government the concerns of the Hong Kong and international communities despite your explanations, and they are continuing to interfere with an internal affair? The amendment would affect the U.S.-Hong Kong policy as well as relations with China, with Taiwan, as well as the stability of Hong Kong. Did you truthfully reflects the concerns of the Hong Kong people, or is it the case that, as you pointed out in your reply, your experience is that you felt good after the face-to-face explanations and you continue your work in this regard? Did you report to the CPG that you successfully convinced Hong Kong people and the international community and that they are now worry-free? Thank you. We realize that the bill is controversial in a sense, but with our constant explanations, everyone has understood the bill better. There are different views towards the bill. Some are supportive, and this we acknowledge. As we carry out the explanations, we try to explain the bill to different people, including foreign envoys in Hong Kong. I personally explained the bill to some representatives from the EU office in Hong Kong. And we also explained the bill to some consuls general from jurisdictions in which we have signed long-term arrangements with. In terms of the surrender arrangements under the bill, as we have explained, the legislative exercise is initiated and led by the HKSAR government. And according to the basic law, the chief executive is accountable to the HKSAR and Central People's Government, and the SAR government has voiced the concerns that arose, and the CPG acknowledges such concerns, and they support the introduction of more safeguards by the SAR government. We have worked hard to explain the amendment exercise to different people. I hope you understand that we are trying to provide a valid legal basis to deal with surrender requests. Mr. Roy Kwong, we are very near the protest on the 9th of June. The SAR government is forcing the issue in the future FOO amendment. Carrie Lam, Teresa Chang, and John Lee are going against the people. Mr. John Lee, this is your final chance. If you do not want to become a culprit of disrupting social stability, you still have time to make a U-turn. Please withdraw the amendment. Secretary, thank you. I reiterate that some people support the bill, some people don't, and this is something we acknowledge. So we have to look at the objectives of the amendment. Under the current regime, there are geographical restrictions, and in terms of case-based arrangement, it is not enforceable. And like I've explained at the panel on security, there are at least 5 cases that could not be dealt with under the case-by-case arrangement and geographical constraints. And among these cases was the homicide in Taiwan, and also 3 cases of murder, and another case involving the committal of a serious offense by a Hong Kong resident overseas. In the past, we rejected 9 surrender requests on a case-by-case basis. So the amendment bill seeks to plug the loophole. That way, we can work with other jurisdictions in combating organized and serious crimes. This is in line with UN practice. Are you going to withdraw the bill or not? like I have explained in my main reply, the bill is necessary, and we hope this would be scrutinized and discussed at LegCo, and we would leave the scrutiny work of the bill to LegCo. Mr. Jimmy. Questions 2 and 3 today have mentioned the U.S. and the U.S. Congress, etc. I realize that different jurisdictions would have different views on the issue. The U.S. has issued a crackdown on Huawei, but Huawei just signed a 50 billion yuan contracts. So is it that we should only consider the stance of the U.S. Congress in considering whether we proceed with the amendment? Legislation is an internal affair of the HKSAR government. Under the Basic Law, the SAR government is required to make policies and introduce bills into LegCo. So for internal affairs of the HKSAR, I hope the international community would give respect and not interfere with our affairs, much like the fact that we would not interfere with the affairs of other jurisdictions. We have explained to different people that our goal is to deal with the most serious offenses, and our proposals are based on practices in other jurisdictions in which a ministerial grade officer would trigger or issue a certificate, and that is the case in Canada. And likewise in Hong Kong, the chief executive would trigger the process. Mr. Horace Chang. Mr. To said he was concerned that the economic interests of the U.S. could potentially be violated, and the U.S. Congress might reinitiate the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. I think the situation in the local situation is not readily understood by other jurisdictions. When we look at the Huawei incident, the U.S. cited national security risks for the U.S.-Mexico border. The U.S. announced an emergency act. As for the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, if human rights are truly jeopardized, and the U.S. Congress should act like what they have for the incident involving the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So from this example, or from these examples, we can see the bills proposed or acts proposed by the U.S. are based on the interests of the United States, and there is no connection to this bill. So given the circumstances, Secretary, how would you explain to the people of Hong Kong that there is no correlation between the both, and how can you dispel these claims? Our relations with other jurisdictions are based on mutual interests, and in terms of numbers, I can illustrate the relations between Hong Kong and the U.S. And like I said, Hong Kong is the second largest merchandise trading partner, and in 2018, the U.S. enjoyed a trade surplus with Hong Kong at $33.8 billion, and the U.S. was the seventh major source of inward direct investments, and the employment with in foreign firms amounted to more than $100,000. And in 2018, 1.33 million U.S. citizens visited Hong Kong. So you can see that our relation is of mutual interest. Thank you.
Third question, Dr. Fernando CHEUNG. On the 15th of last month, the director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, HKMAR, of the State Council said that the work of the SAR government on amending the two pieces of ordinances regarding the transfer of fugitive offenders were necessary, appropriate, reasonable, and lawful, and the worries about it were unwarranted. And 17th of last month, director of the Liaison Office of the Central People's Government of Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, the Liaison Office met with dozens of Hong Kong deputies of the Hong Kong People's Congress and a Hong Kong member of the Hong Kong National Committee of the Chinese People Political Consultative Committee, notifying them that the central authorities support the SAR government's effort to amend the ordinances in accordance with the law and requesting them to support the government in accomplishing its work on amending the ordinances. On 21st of last month, Vice Premier of the State Council said that the SAR government amending the ordinances were constitutional and a manifestation of the rule of law, and the central authorities fully support the work of amending the ordinances. On the same day, the Chief Executive said that both HKMAO and the Liaison Office had expressed their stance on amending the ordinances because external forces were intervening, and the issues concerning the amendment in ordinances have been elevated to the level of one country, two system. In this connection, would the government inform this council, 1, whether the expression of views by foreign government in respect of personal safety of the nationals in Hong Kong is tantamount to an intervention by external forces referred by the CE? If so, of the justifications of that, and whether it assess if CE remarks have seriously undermined the status of Hong Kong as an international financial center. If it has assessed and the outcome is in the affirmative, on the remedial measures of the assessment outcome is in the negative, the justification for that too. Of the details of government's effort in explaining the amendment of the ordinance to representatives of the foreign chambers of commerce and foreign government officials and listening to their views, including the number and date of meetings, as well as the names of the Chamber of Commerce and post titles of foreign government officials. If the target to which the explanation were given did not include foreign government officials, of the reasons for that. And 3, Article 23 of Basic Law provides that no department of the Central People's Government and no province, autonomous region, or municipality directly under the central government interfere in the affairs, which the SAR administer its own in accordance with the law, whether it has assessed a male official's expression of their forces stands constitute in violation of provision. If it has assessed and the outcome the affirmative, how the government will pursue the matter. If the assessment outcome is in the negative, of the justification for that. Secretary for Justice. President, surrender of fugitive offenders, SFO, is international consensus cooperate on combating organized and cross-boundary crimes. The existence fugitive offenders ordinance, FOO CAF 503, have drawn reference from the United Nations Model Treaty on Extradition and is in line with the common international practice. It has in place inadequate human rights and legal procedural safeguards, which balance the need to apprehend fugitive offenders and protect human rights. The subject person has the right to appeal, apply for habeas corpus, and appeal to the Court of Final Appeal, and can also apply for judicial review of any decision or procedure and appeal to the Court of Final Appeal. The Hong Kong Special Administrative Region Government proposed to amend the FOO and the Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Ordinance MLAO CAF 525 and the Fugitive Offenders Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Amendment Bill 2019 was submitted to the LegCo on 3rd of April 2019. The objective is to form a legal basis on which the SAR government can make necessary preparation for bringing the suspect of the Taiwan homicide case happened in early 2018 to face due legal sanction and to plug the loopholes in the existing regime of SFO and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters MLA, including the geographical restrictions and some impractical operational procedures therein. My consolidated reply to 3 parts of Dr. Cheung's question is as follows. Some jurisdictions in the international community have expressed concern over the FOO amendment by the government. We realize that more explanation of the bill will help people better understand its provisions, objectives, and safeguards. The bill targets fugitive offenders of serious crimes, definitely not ordinary people who are law-abiding. The case-based surrender proposed by the bill helps to ensure that the offenders of serious crime punishable with imprisonment for 7 years or more cannot elude liability by taking advantage of a legal vacuum while protecting the safety of the general public and the community. The legislative amendment proposed, if passed, will protect the whole society, including business activities, from the threat of offenders. It also has positive effect on is necessary for the performance of international obligations in maintaining public security and combating serious crimes. Some places which have entered a long-term SFO agreement with Hong Kong expressed concerns about whether amending FOO would affect the current long-term agreements. I would like to point out clearly that the proposed amendments will not affect the existing long-term SFO arrangements already in place between Hong Kong and other jurisdictions, nor will it affect the long-term arrangements to be signed between Hong Kong and other jurisdictions in the future. Case-based surrender arrangements only apply to jurisdictions which have not entered into a long-term SFO arrangements with Hong Kong. Case-based surrender is only a supplementary measure before long-term cooperation arrangements come into effect and will be adopted only when an applicable long-term agreement is not available. Entering long-term agreements with other jurisdictions remain our major and principal policy objectives. Jurisdiction with long-term agreement will not and cannot make any case-based surrender arrangements. The SAR government attached importance to the views of all social sectors in respect of the public. Since consulting with the Legislative Panel on Security on 15 February, the government team comprised of different principal officials had kept explaining the proposed legislative amendments to various sectors and listening to their views, and elaborate on the proposal to public many times through different means. Without stopping their efforts, the principal officials met with different sectors and local communities on the numerous occasions to have face-to-face dialogue and exchange. In respect of organizations, the government has worked hard on providing extensive explanations. As at end May, the Security Bureau and other policy bureau in the SAR government has met with more than 50 organizations regarding the proposed amendments. In March, the Secretary for Security had a meeting with the European Union Office to Hong Kong and Macau and the related councils general or their representatives at the central government offices for the purpose of briefing and explaining on the aim and contents of the bill. In March and April, meetings were held with the councils general with some countries with long-term agreement in place for the same purpose. During the meetings, the Secretary for Security stressed that the bill would not affect the long-term agreements already signed and to be signed, and that case-based surrender would not be applicable to jurisdictions with a long-term agreement. The bill sought only the removal of geographical restrictions for case-based surrender and the activation of surrender by certificate issued by the Chief Executive CE, while maintaining the legal regime, court procedures, and human rights safeguards. Additional limitations may also be imposed. Furthermore, the government team attended meetings of the Legislative Panel on Security for a total of 20 hours on 5 consecutive days in the recent week to discuss the policy objective, the contents of the bill, and respond to members' questions, so that the government's team could explain more about the bill's contents. Regarding the remarks made by the central government on the amendments to FOO and MLAO, as pointed out by CE earlier, the HKSA government has assumed a leading role in and been responsible for taking forward the legislative amendment all along. Under the provisions of the Basic Law, CE being the head of HKSAR is accountable to the Central People's Government and the HKSAR. CE has reflected the concerns of Hong Kong society on legislative amendments to the central authorities. Regarding the need to take further measures to allay public concerns, the central authorities have expressed understanding, respect, and support the SAR government's various mainland-related measures for enhancing protection, hoping that the government's consolidated response can promote rational discussions in the local community and ease worries. Besides there having many views in the society about the central authorities and HKSAR as well as one country, two system, the basic law is the law for implementing one country, two system. As such, it's fairly normal for the central government to speak on the legislative amendments. Thank you, President. Dr. Choung. We ready, Chad? Quorum call.
Jiang Cheung.
Dr. Fernando CHEUNG. President, the government failed to give a direct answer to my question. Most importantly, this FO amendment exercise is a local legislation exercise and within our internal affairs, and yet the Central Liaison Office had summoned the National People's Congress and the NCCP-VCC delegates in a high-profile manner. A lot of them are also LegCo members, and these liaison office have pressed them to support and vote for the bill. Isn't it a violation of the Article 22 that the no department of the CPG and no private autonomous region may interfere in the affairs of the SAR region and minister on its own in accordance with the law? Please give me a direct answer. In my main reply, I already explained and answered the member's question. The Chief Executive had pointed out, as reiterated in my main reply, on this legislative amendment exercise, the government has taken the lead and also be accountable. As the head of the SCR government, in accordance with the basic law, the CE is accountable to both this CPG and the SCR. The Chief Executive had relayed to central authorities the concern in relation to the bill, and the central government had expressed understanding of the further measures proposed and also respect and support the government in proposing additional safeguards. And there are a lot of voices in the public and on the central government and Hong Kong relations and one country, two system. They basically have stated on how do we implement one country, two system as the objective. As such, the central government is fairly normal to speak on the amendments, and the Hong Kong understood that the public have diverse views on this. There are supporters and also those not supporting it. In our explanations to various sectors, and different sectors can also exchange their views, it really demonstrated the Hong Kong's freedom to freely discuss. While the basic law Article 22 has stipulated that the central government and department shall not interfere in the affairs. Please propose your question. Please sit down. Any supplement, Secretary for Security? We fully in compliance with the basic law. Mr. Roy Kwong. To follow up on the simple question I have stated repeatedly, who are the central authorities in the Taiwan? The Secretary claimed to investigate in Taiwan homicide case. I haven't heard from the Secretary that which are the central authorities in Taiwan. If the Secretary failed to answer the question, I suppose that you should step down from office. SS? I gave an answer on many occasions. Well, for repetitive questions, I will just repeat to the member on the true answer. In these surrender arrangements, while discussing the surrender arrangements, both parties will require the other side to make assurances. They also are able to represent the jurisdiction. On Taiwan, we have the established platform, which is the cultural nations, and we have we continue to use this two platforms on continue to the relevant matters that need to be addressed and on the matters mentioned by the members. They failed to answer my question. Because it's only limited to the central government, are you acknowledging the sovereignty of the Republic of China? So which are the central authorities of Taiwan? For each surrender arrangements, we will discuss with the requesting party whether it can represent its jurisdiction in making such assurances. So we do need to have making up an effective assurances. Mr. Felix Cheung. When this bill was first tabled, a lot of questions from the business sector, and the Secretary have proactively meet with the business sector to with explanation, which will allay most of our worries, and not for the the 20 hours of meeting that just concluded. And what the DOJ and this S3S had explained, so that we now have a very clear idea on the amendment bill. So if there are other questions or queries by outside bodies, for example, the Foreign Chamber of Commerce or some of the community are concerned upon the passage of the bill that the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech will be affected. We've heard that the Hong Kong Journalists Association have written twice to request to meet with this S4S, and while the media sector concerns, if we get the time, you should explain to the media sector so that you can also allay their fears, concerns as well. Thank you, President. We understand that the more explanation will be beneficial. As we all know, currently under some we are quite near the second reading of the bill, and me and the DOJ team have been working non-stop for the past 5 days on the special meeting by the security panel, and a lot of things that have been requested by at the panel meeting will continue to be taken up. And like Mr. Cheung said, that the press freedom and the freedom of the speech, like I reiterated, according to Basic Law Article 27, is that the Hong Kong people enjoy the freedom of the press, free to assembly and for join union and go on strike. I also reiterate, and to judge whether a certain act will be being surrendered, and not one useful principle would be whether we apply the double jeopardy, that whether the same act that shall happen in Hong Kong will it be a criminal offense. On these fugitive surrender arrangements, it has also applied the threshold of offenses punishable by 7 years of imprisonment or both. For example, the press of news gathering and the freedom of speech or creative freedom or academic freedom or religion act, besides being fully protected by the basic law. Another major consideration will be whether freedom exercised by this person shall happen in Hong Kong would it constitute a serious criminal offense. If it's not a crime itself, then don't need to worry. We have such freedom enshrined so that the activities are fully protected under the basic law. And also not breaking the Hong Kong law, there's no way that it will be an extraditable circumstances. And if those acts could not meet the threshold of imprisonment up to 7 years, then it's not applicable in the surrender arrangements. Mr. Lam Chak-ting. Just now, Secretary Johnson said that we're still a very short time before this second reading debate. Therefore, it's difficult to arrange a meeting with the media sector. So I asked the Secretary, the HKJA, the Bar Association, a lot of the electors from the legal sector have asked you to attend to different forums, and yet you've been avoiding them, and now you claim you have enough time at the last minute. Isn't that hypocritical that you have not the sincerity listening to different views? SS, we have received a lot of views by different parties, especially written ones. Each submitted views have been duly considered, whether by the Security Bureau and the DOJ. So we attach great importance to each view received, and on certain views, the Secretary and the Secretary for Justice on the failure to form a bill committee to scrutinize the bill. We have both organized a press conferences to explain the views on the certain legislative proposals. I know that this explanation should continue. We also will organize a series of explanations to take place in due course. Mr. Alvin Young, President, it had been reported that the Chief Secretary refused to retract the bill because she don't want to become a lame duck administration. Now the government required the help of the Central Liaison Office to corral enough votes. In the face of a question by the foreign governments on Foreign Chamber of Commerce on the credibility of Hong Kong, would John Lee consider that upon the forced passage of the FO Amendment Bill that we have undermined the global community confidence in Hong Kong, when would he consider resignation to allow accountable? Thank you, President. I stress repeatedly that this legislative exercise is led by and performed by the government, thus being in accordance with the basic law. The government would take pros on the policy and also the bill to be dropped by the government. We understood there are different views. Besides the opposing view, there's a lot of supportive views as well. As for different sectors, for example, foreign and local chamber of commerce organizations, we know that more explanation is beneficial. Those that we shall continue on this series of explanations, and today I will attend several explanations meetings, and on each explanation sessions I've explained that the amendment bill is to target those on serious crimes, not law-abiding citizens. So when the public are free from the threat of these criminals, they will help to maintain law and order and beneficial to the business environment. I hope that I will explain this point further so that and understand perspective.
Question 4, Mr. Jonathan Ho. I think, the biggest fugitives in Hong Kong are rodents and not Hong Kong people. President, the rodent infestation rate RIR of Wong Tai Sin district for the whole of last year stood at 1%, which was the second lowest among 19 districts in Hong Kong. However, quite a number of residents in that district have pointed out that rodent infestation in the district is serious, with frequent spotting of rats in markets and public housing estates. Furthermore, the world's first 2 cases of human infection of rat hepatitis E were found in Hong Kong last year, whose patients were both residing in Wong Tai Sin. In this connection, will the government inform this council? 1. Given that when the RIR of a district reaches 10% or higher, the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department (FEHD) will step up rodent control work in the district, and when the district's RIR reaches 20% or higher, relevant government departments will form a joint task force and launch a special rodent control operation of the criteria adopted by the department for setting such levels for triggering strengthened rodent control work. 2. As FEHD has admitted that RIRs cannot fully reflect the actual situations of rodent infestation in individual districts, whether the department will review the RIR and work with scientific research institutions to devise a new index with a higher reference value, if it will, of the details. If not, the reasons for that, say for example using char siu instead of sweet potato. 3. Given that a total of 5 cases of human infection of rat hepatitis E have so far been recorded in Hong Kong, how the Department of Health ascertains that there is no unreported case in the community, and what measures are there to stop the disease from spreading and becoming an endemic disease. Let me remind members that you will have to stick to the script of your question and not deviate from it. A member calls for a quorum call.
何啟明議員，
Mr. Jonathan Ho, please remove your props.
冇阻住其他嘅。
But it doesn't block your sight line. It affects the hygiene of electrical.
食物及衛生局局長。
Secretary for Food and Health. President, my reply to the member's question is as follows. At present, there is no internationally adopted rodent infestation index. The FEHD, members, please be quiet, has devised the rodent infestation rate and the corresponding actions at different levels with reference to overseas practices and the actual situation and experience in Hong Kong. The index of the FEHD is divided into 3 levels. Level 1 is below 10%. It indicates that rodent infestation is not extensive during the survey period. FEHD staff will carry out routine rodent prevention and control work and conduct targeted anti-rodent operations at locations where rodent activities are detected. Level 2, 10% to 19%, indicates that rodent infestation is slightly extensive during the survey period. FEHD's anti-rodent operations will cover the activity areas of an entire rodent population. Level 3 refers to when the index is over 20%. It indicates that rodent infestation is extensive during the survey period and rodent colonies may have been formed. The FHD will set up an interdepartmental working group to be chaired by a district environmental hygiene superintendent to coordinate anti-rodent operations at district level. It includes strengthening cleansing services, assisting other departments in carrying out anti-rodent work in areas under their purview, and promoting rodent prevention and control in the community. 2. The RIR assesses the distribution of rodent infestation in public areas within the survey areas. It's used to reflect the extensiveness of rodent infestation but not the rodent problem in a whole district. The main purpose of conducting the RIR survey is to identify problematic areas which require allocation of targeted resources for carrying out anti-rodent operations. In formulating rodent prevention and control work, the department will take into account, in addition to the index, factors such as the complaint figures and reports, views of the local community, and trails left by rodents found during inspections. Then a comprehensive assessment of the problem in the district concerned will be formulated. And there will be plans to devise targeted anti-rodent operations in these areas. To increase the sensitivity of the surveys for more accurate assessment of the problem, the department is conducting tests on different rodent baits to identify the most suitable one for the situation in Hong Kong. In addition, the department will annually review the locations and coverage of baiting points in the district. The number of survey areas will be increased from 41, around 2,300 baiting points, to 50, around 2,650 baiting points this year. Apart from the RIR survey, the department is exploring other methods to monitor rodent infestation. It includes the use of night vision or thermal imaging cameras with artificial intelligence to detect and analyze the presence of rodents. Besides, the department will regularly review the latest measures adopted by the World Health Organization, WHO, and other cities for rodent surveillance. They will work out suitable measures for Hong Kong having regard to our situation. The FHD is inviting WHO experts to visit Hong Kong and give us advice in this respect, while exploring the possibilities of inviting other overseas experts to come here. 3. A total of 5 cases of human infection of rat hepatitis E virus (HEV) have been recorded by the Department of Health since 2018. The Department of Health's epidemiological investigations have yet to determine the source and the route of infection. There is also no scientific evidence of direct human-to-human transmission of rat HEV at the moment. Since 2018 November, the Department of Health has enhanced the surveillance of HEV by conducting further testing on rat HEV in the samples collected from HEV patients, in addition to regular testing on human HEV types. The DFH will continue to enhance its surveillance of HEV, including conducting testing on human and rat HEVs in clinical specimens. The DFH will also conduct further analysis on samples collected from patients with rat HEV infection in collaboration with the Department of Microbiology of the Hong Kong U. Further, the Department of Health issued a letter to all local doctors and hospitals on the 17th of May to inform them of the latest situation and preventive measures and to remind them to pay special attention to immunosuppressed persons with liver function derangement. The DFH will continue to closely monitor the situation here. The government has attached a lot of importance to anti-rodent work. In view of recent cases of human infection of rat HEV, the government has launched a territory-wide cleaning campaign on the 20th of May, targeting areas such as rail lanes, housing estates, food premises, and public markets. Cleaning work and enhanced enforcement actions have been carried out, and public education and publicity in this regard have also been strengthened. All departments will remain vigilant and work together for effective prevention and control. For instance, Highways Department has stepped up its inspection work at rail lanes with serious rodent problems in all districts, carried out instant repairs to damaged road surface or nullers, improved road conditions, and filled rat holes. The Housing Department has also examined whether the rodent-proof devices installed on over 180 public housing estates function well and will repair, reinforce, or add devices at once if it's needed to eliminate rodents and their harborage points. The FHD will enhance street cleaning, carry out publicity and public education work on rodent prevention and control, and step up enforcement actions against illegal dumping of waste by food premises. All district officers of the Home Affairs Department and the FHD will also strengthen liaison with property management companies, district councils, and local communities in order to raise public awareness of the importance of maintaining personal and environmental hygiene in preventing rodent infestation on private land, including people's homes and housing estates. Apart from government efforts, the collaboration between the public and public, including food premises, to eliminate the conditions for rodents to survive as source is very important. The government will consolidate the experience we have gained from the 3-month territory-wide cleaning campaign, continue ongoing prevention and control work, and strengthen collaboration with district councils. Mr. Ho, it's reported by the press that it will cost $1,300 for a rat, so it will cost altogether $11,100. If a lot of money is spent on catching rats and it is not effective, well, I think it's something to do with collaboration. Well, now there is a steering committee on rat control. The work hasn't been effective. We have to have further discussion to enhance effectiveness on prevention and control work against rodent. Well, we have to do something more in order to address the rodent problem in different districts, including Wong Tai Sin. In this fiscal year, we have increased $91 million on different departments on rodent prevention and control work. If necessary, the amount will be increased. As the CSFOI and the CE have said, the government is willing to put additional resources to properly carry out rodent control work. So you don't have to worry about resources. In relation to interdepartmental collaboration, it has to be strengthened. In July last year, we have upgraded the steering committee on pest control. We have strengthened their work. Apart from mosquito control and bug control, rodent control is also work is being carried out by this work. They have set targets. They have a strengthened collaboration and monitoring. On the 20th of May, as we have said, that departments have worked together to start a 3-month territory-wide cleaning campaign. We will be vigilant on rodent control and prevention. Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you. Well, I know that the entire territory is concerned about this. Of course, we need to keep hygiene. At 3 p.m., there will be a press conference organized by the DAB to address this issue. Just now, Dr. Sophia Chan, the Secretary, talked about enhanced law enforcement actions. In relation to the $400 million of a pest control fund, well, the government is of the view that it's a medium to long-term measure. Currently, it will not be taken forward. I know that they have deployed resources to adopt a bottom-up approach. Say, for example, if a head of department requires resources, they will write to you. But what we've heard from the community is that department heads might not want to take up the work, so they will not write to you. I would like to ask questions similar to that of Mr. Ho. How do you ensure that head of departments will be willing to write to you? If they don't write to you, they won't have additional resources. And people will have to take up additional work without additional resources. Frontline workers will have to bear the brunt. Secretary, in this fiscal year, apart from increasing additional resources, we have deployed $91 million to different departments, including the AFCD, Department of Health, Drainage Services Department, FEHD, Lands Department, LCSD, as well as Water Supplies Department. We have to first understand what different departments will need to enhance surveillance, prevention, and control. That is the first step. The CS4A is the chair of the Steering Committee on Pest Control. In June, there will be a meeting. I believe that they will learn about the progress of pest control work of departments and if they need additional resources to do their job. Thirdly, we would like to take a district-led approach. Apart from different departments, well, apart from public places, there are also some private land that have problems. We need to strengthen our work and adopt a district-led approach. Ms. Rebecca Chan, the Secretary said that they will invite WHO experts to come to Hong Kong to give us advice. The community told us that we have to tackle the problem at source and keep our street clean. That would be very effective. The Secretary has mentioned over 10 times strengthening liaison, collaboration, publicity, education, and everything else. Of course, it's easier said than done. When it comes to resources, it is funding allocation. So I'd like to ask, in relation to the 3-month territory-wide cleaning campaign, we are in a dire, urgent, great need. So can you give us some specific figures in relation to the cleaning campaign? Secretary, thank you. President and the member for the question. Well, in relation to our 3-month cleaning campaign, the FEHD has looked at all 18 districts to see what are the problem areas. Mr. Ho mentioned about the RIR, the rodent infestation rate. Apart from taking that into account, we will also look at the situation of the district, number of complaints, etc. So we will identify target areas and then decide what additional manpower resources are needed. In June, there will be the meeting headed by the CS4A. They will look at resources. It's not just about resources, not just about the coming 3 months. There is a constant need of additional resources. As a result, an additional $91 million will be devoted in this area. In the coming 3 months, under the leadership of the CS4A of the Pest Control Steering Committee, these issues will be addressed. Mr. Kwok Wai-keung, well, the Secretary has been mentioning about strengthening and resources. Well, the Secretary might have devoted additional resources and manpower. How do you ensure that the rate of catching rodents is faster than the breeding rate? If it is slower than that, then the work will not be effective. So how do you gauge the effectiveness of the cleaning campaign? What will you use as an indicator to gauge whether you have achieved what you've set out to do and that the public are satisfied? I thank Mr. Kwok for the question. On top of the 3-month cleaning campaign, we will also target improvement of hygiene, rodent prevention and control, and enhancement of law enforcement actions. If we have to control rodents in relation to cutting off their food, the places they live, well, we will have to take a targeted approach. We will deal with railings and public markets. The FEHD will carry out the work. In relation to indices, we will refer to rodents we have caught live, dead. We'll also look at filling of rat holes. In 2018, we have caught 16,504 of them. We have also killed by poisonous bait 27,874. We have filled 9,129 rat holes. Apart from our recurrent cleaning work and the territory-wide cleaning work, they have been effective. Say, for example, in Eastern District, the a catch rate has dropped from 9.4% to 2.5% for typo. It has dropped from 5.7% to 1.4%. If we look at the average of the territory figures, as a drop by 2.1%, it shows that our work has been effective. We don't just look at the RIR when we assess the effectiveness of our work. We'll also try to identify areas where we need additional effort.
Fifth question, Mr. Chan Han-pan. Thank you, President. It is learned that in recent years, quite a number of Hong Kong people have moved to live in the mainland cities within the GBA, the Greater Bay Area. As the healthcare protection regime on the mainland does not cover Hong Kong people, quite a number of such Hong Kong people have opted for returning to Hong Kong to seek medical treatment. Among them, some need to be transferred by mainland ambulances to a port and then, after crossing the boundary, by a Hong Kong ambulance to a nearby public hospital. As this transfer process is indirect and time-consuming, the conditions of the patients may be aggravated as a result. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it knows the number of cases in each of the past 3 years in which non-emergency and non-critically ill Hong Kong people were transferred by an ambulance from an immigration control point to a public hospital, and, among such cases, the number of those in which the conditions of the patients were aggravated during the transfer, whether it will discuss with the University of Hong Kong Shenzhen Hospital or the Hong Kong U Shenzhen Hospital the deployment of ambulances by the hospital to provide cross-boundary direct transfer of Hong Kong people to public hospitals for treatment. 2, whether it will open up the electronic health record sharing system for use by the Hong Kong U Shenzhen Hospital and in future other mainland hospitals recognized by Hong Kong so as to facilitate Hong Kong people living on the mainland to seek medical treatment in such hospitals. If so, of the details and timetable, if not the reasons for that. And 3, whether it will extend the scope of application of the elderly healthcare vouchers to cover hospitals of Tier 3 Class A in the Bay Area. If so, of the details and implementation timetable, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for Food and Health. President, the government of the Hong Kong SAR government maintains liaison with the relevant institutions in the Greater Bay Area and takes account of the views of members of the public and provides suitable health-related measures for Hong Kong people working and living in the GBA where appropriate. My reply to the 3 parts of the question is as follows. 1. According to the information provided by the Security Bureau, under normal circumstances, upon receipt of a call for emergency ambulance services, the Fire Services Department will dispatch ambulances in accordance with the established arrangements to transport patients from the Hong Kong ports of land control points to a nearby accident and emergency department under the Hospital Authority to receive the services required. The number of calls for emergency ambulance services handled by the FSD at the Hong Kong ports of various land control points average about 6,200 per year. Over the past 3 years, FSD did not keep separate statistics on whether the patients concerned were non-critical Hong Kong patients or whether they were transferred from the mainland to Hong Kong. If Hong Kong residents choose to return to Hong Kong for treatment or recuperation, we in principle support cross-boundary transfer of non-critical Hong Kong patients with stable conditions using ordinary passenger vehicles by designated institutions in the GBA, or the application of necessary licenses from the governments of Hong Kong and Guangdong without needing to use ambulances for the transfer. 2. According to the Electronic Health Record Sharing System Ordinance, that is CAP 625, healthcare providers or HCPs, such as hospitals or clinics joining the Electronic Health Record Sharing System or the EHRSS, must provide healthcare at one or more service locations in Hong Kong. After joining the EHRSS, HCPs can open accounts for their healthcare professionals so that they, with the consent of healthcare recipients or referred to as patients below, and for the purpose of providing healthcare services, can access and share the patient's electronic health records on the EHRSS in accordance with the need-to-know principle. According to the ordinance, only the 13 types of healthcare professionals specified in the schedule to the ordinance who are registered under the relevant local laws can access patients' health data on the EHRSS. As regards patients who join the EHRSS, they should have received, be receiving, or be likely to receive healthcare performed in Hong Kong. According to the above requirements, if a medical institution does not have any service locations in Hong Kong, it is not eligible for registration as an HCP under the system. If a patient has never received or has no plans to receive healthcare performed in Hong Kong, he or she also should not join the EHRSS. We have adopted more stringent arrangements and measures on the participation and use of the EHRSS with a view to protecting patient privacy, security of the EHRSS, and integrity of the records. Like other Hong Kong laws, the ordinance cannot be enforced in places outside Hong Kong. We are concerned that if there are cases where the HCPs or healthcare professionals do not abide by the legislation and requirements in relation to the EHRSS, and they do not have operations or are not registered in Hong Kong, it would be very difficult for the government to follow up. In view of the above considerations, the government has no plans at this stage to allow HCPs without operations in Hong Kong or healthcare professionals who are not registered in Hong Kong to join or use the EHRSS. 3. The Department of Health, or DH, collaborated with the Hong Kong U Shenzhen Hospital to launch a pilot scheme in October 2015 to allow eligible Hong Kong elders to use elderly healthcare vouchers to pay for designated outpatient services at the Hong Kong U Shenzhen Hospital. We noted from a survey conducted by the Hong Kong U Shenzhen Hospital last October, which successfully interviewed some 380 Hong Kong elders, and 92% of them indicated that they were satisfied or very satisfied with the services received at HKU Shenzhen Hospital paid for by the vouchers. The DH completed a review of the elderly health care voucher scheme earlier this year. Considering the smooth operation and popularity of the pilot scheme, the government will regularize it on the 26th of June this year so as to provide greater certainty for Hong Kong elders to continue to use the vouchers at the Hong Kong Shenzhen Hospital. We have considered whether there are suitable medical institutions for extending the use of vouchers in the Greater Bay Area. In addition to the quality of healthcare, we also need to consider the clinical governance structure, administrative procedures, financial arrangement, operating environment, and employee skills of the institution concerned, as well as the views of the other stakeholders, including healthcare professionals and patients in Hong Kong. We are also particularly concerned about how to monitor voucher use, since the relevant laws and codes of practice of Hong Kong are not applicable to medical institutions and healthcare professionals in places outside Hong Kong. If there is non-compliance with the requirements of the elderly healthcare voucher scheme, and the institutions or individuals concerned have no connection whatsoever with Hong Kong, it would be very difficult for the DH to follow up and assist the elders. And therefore, we do not have any specific arrangements on extending the use of the vouchers in the Greater Bay Area. Yes, Mr. Chan. Well, in a reply, sorry, Mr. Chan Han-pan, Mr. Gary Fan, I'd like to call for I'd like to make a quorum call. Thank you.
陳恒鑌議員。
Mr. Chan Hak-kan. Mr. Chan Han-pan. Thank you, President. Just now, the Secretary, in reply to my question, she was actually contradicting herself because at the beginning she said that, well, for those working and living in the Greater Bay Area, appropriate medical and healthcare measures will be provided to them. But then she then said that, in fact, there's no need to use ambulances for the transfer, and also there's no plan for health institutions in Hong Kong to be able to use the EHRSS, and also for the extension of such services to the GBA. The SAR government does not have any plan yet. But then at the same time, she said that appropriate services will be provided to these residents. So my question is, all right, for Hong Kong residents on the mainland, if they have sustained certain illnesses and if they need to come back to Hong Kong for medical services. So the administration is now suggesting that they can use ordinary passenger vehicles for such transfer. And what if the condition deteriorates? Then if it's just a transfer by ordinary passenger vehicles, is it appropriate? And also, if the ordinary passenger vehicles are appropriate, then how come we still have 6,200 such trips made by ambulances transferring Hong Kong patients at the land control points to A&E departments of the HA? So you should be issuing licenses to the Hong Kong Shenzhen Hospital so that they can make or they can provide cross-boundary services so that where there is a need, Hong Kong patients can immediately be transferred back to Hong Kong for treatment. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Chan, for your question. On the one hand, with regard to cross-boundary medical services and also cross-boundary transfer of patients back to Hong Kong for treatment or recuperation, we do in principle support certain institutions in the GBA to use ordinary passenger vehicles by designated institutions for transfer of non-critical patients back to Hong Kong for treatment and recuperation. Because if the patients are in critical condition, then we would not suggest or advise them to be transferred back to Hong Kong for treatment, because if the condition should deteriorate, then there might be sudden changes in the course of the transfer, and therefore that's not advisable. For stable patients, if they want to come back to Hong Kong for treatment or recuperation, then they can also approach the governments on both sides of the boundary so that they can use ordinary passenger vehicles for the transfer, and there is no need for them to use ambulances for the transfer. And this practice is based on patient safety. And we are of the view that for non-critical patients, they can use such services without the use of ambulances. Thank you. Mr. Martin Liao. Well, for the GBA's infrastructure development, very often Hong Kong patients have to face this problem that they may not have been registered on the mainland, and because they have brought with them some drugs that have not been registered on the mainland. That's why there are problems. That's why last month the Drug Administration in China has signed a collaboration framework with the Hong Kong authorities on the use of drugs and so on. And there would also be pilot schemes for the relaxation of Hong Kong registered medication and also medical devices and so on, so that they can also be used on the mainland. So my question is, on relaxing common drugs in Hong Kong, and if that's permitted, then what about the institutions that have participated in the scheme, and also what about the details of the program? Can we be given all those details? Secretary. Yes, thank you, Mr. Martin Liao, for your question. In fact, earlier on, the State Drug Control Administration's head has come to Hong Kong, and we have also positively discussed with him with regard to some commonly used drugs and also medical devices to see if they can also be gradually introduced into the Greater Bay Area. We have also signed some agreements. Initially, we would like to use the Hong Kong Shenzhen Hospital as a pilot point for the use of such medication and devices, and that's being supported by the administration on the mainland. But then in order to do that, we also need the support from the Guangdong province. In Guangdong province, and also if it's to be used in the Hong Kong Yusheng Hospital, then we will also need the support of the Guangdong Medical Products Administration and at the NMPA. Given the support they have rendered us, we are actually talking to Guangdong Province and Shenzhen authorities on how the Hong Kong Yusheng Hospital can be used as a pilot point for some commonly used drugs and medical devices to be introduced to the GBA. Thank you. Yes, Mr. CHAN Hak-kan. Well, many Hong Kong residents are faced with this healthcare problem when they work and live in the GBA. Yes, the Secretary said that the Hong Kong Yusheng Hospital would allow for the use of elderly healthcare vouchers. But then, if these patients need to see a doctor in the GBA, they will also have to pay a higher fee than their counterparts on the mainland. So, would the administration talk to the Guangdong provincial authorities so that Hong Kong residents will be able to get some primary health care on the mainland so that they be able to pay the same fare as their counterparts on the mainland? Secretary, thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. Hak-kan Chair, for your question. With the development in the Greater Bay Area, there will be more Hong Kong people living and working in the GBA, and healthcare services would also be one of the more imminent problems that they may encounter. That's why we have also got different options available for them, and we are also trying to get the support of the state authorities to ensure that Hong Kong residents will be able to get better healthcare services in the Greater Bay Area. We are now talking to the Guangdong provincial authorities and also the Macau healthcare authorities and also the Food and Health Bureau in Hong Kong. We have actually established a platform, which is an annual meeting for the three parties to discuss common issues involving Hong Kong, Macau, and the 9 cities in the Greater Bay Area in terms of healthcare services collaboration, and also in the outline framework for the Greater Bay Area, how we can get better support and implementation plan for healthcare services to be provided to our residents. But then as we have different practices and protocols, it will take time for us to work out a solution. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. Thank you, President. With the further implementation of the outline plan for the Greater Bay Area, there will be more Hong Kong people working and living in the Greater Bay Area. That's why we need to step up these services. So will the administration be considering promoting Hong Kong healthcare institutions to develop healthcare services in the Greater Bay Area so that Hong Kong residents will be able to use more familiar services on the mainland in order to meet their needs in the Greater Bay Area? Secretary, thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. Ma, for your questions. All along, for the development of the Greater Bay Area, in terms of healthcare services, we attach a lot of importance to that. In August last year, together with the professional healthcare groups, some are also institutions providing healthcare services in the private sector. We actually went to the Greater Bay Area for a visit, and we met with some officials to find out more about the local situation. And we also noted that some private healthcare institutions from Hong Kong have also been developing their healthcare services in the Greater Bay Area. In some cases, they have been providing certain services and they'd like to expand the services, and they'd also like to provide such services at more locations. And in other cases, they may not have yet established any service points in the GBA, but then after understanding the situation better, they would also be exploring opportunities to see if they can promote such services in the Greater Bay Area. So we've been working closely with them and progress has been made. But then we will also have to note that many people have been reminding us that well, for healthcare professionals in Hong Kong, we are also suffering from a shortage, and that's why we've been working very hard to develop the work in the Greater Bay Area. And yet, on the other hand, we would also have to find ways to increase the supply of healthcare professionals, including doctors, nurses, and also allied healthcare professionals, in order to ensure that we can also provide such services in Hong Kong appropriately. Yes, Mr. Gary Fan. Well, on the mainland, they've already implemented this program to enable eligible Hong Kong residents to apply for resident cards on the mainland. So they would include residents from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, and they would also be eligible for social welfare services and also primary healthcare services. So on the mainland, they have already taken steps to include Hong Kong residents in their healthcare system. So to me, for those who have chosen to live in the Greater Bay Area, if they think that it's their choice to live and work in the Greater Bay Area and they think it's superior to that in Hong Kong, then they should be able to deal with all the basic services needed in the Greater Bay Area, including healthcare services and insurance and so on, or else Hong Kong's public healthcare sector will still be facing a very heavy burden. As the Secretary said, we are also having a shortage of healthcare professionals in Hong Kong. So my follow-up question is, what would the SAR government be explaining to the public and also publicizing this to the public? That is, when Hong Kong residents are able to get this resident card in the Greater Bay Area, and if they have already joined a social insurance programs, then unless they are critically ill, they should resort to healthcare services in the Greater Bay Area instead of asking the mainland and Hong Kong authorities to arrange for transfer services for them to come back to the public hospitals in Hong Kong for treatment and so on. So will you be doing that, Secretary? Thank you for your question, Mr. Gary Fan. In fact, under the outline plan for the Greater Bay Area, on the one hand, we have been working on certain areas in order to provide convenience to Hong Kong residents. So that's the overall development of the Greater Bay Area. And when it comes to healthcare services, we'd like to meet their needs. And I'm sure that's the expectation of Hong Kong residents on us too. And also, there are certain policies that can provide convenience to Hong Kong residents who live and work in the Greater Bay Area so that they'll be able to use such facilities and services. So on that premise, I believe that the public would also have their own choices, so that when the circumstances are appropriate, they would be using the facilities in the Greater Bay Area. But then when there is a need, they can also come back to Hong Kong to use Hong Kong's healthcare services.
Last oral question, Mr. Gary Chan. Thank you, Mr. President. Some members of the public have relayed to me that as the existing tolls of the various road tunnels and bridges vary, residents in some districts need to bear higher transport fares. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, of the considerations based on which the government determines whether and at what levels road tunnels and bridges should be tolled, whether construction cost is one of the considerations? 2, of the operating revenues and expenditures, respectively, of the government-tolled tunnels and the Lantau link in each of the past 5 years. And 3, whether it will comprehensively review the toll levels of the government-tolled tunnels and the Lantau link and consider adjusting downward or dispensing with the tolls. If so, of the details, if not the reasons for that. Thank you. Secretary for Transport and Housing. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Madam Deputy, currently there are a total of 16 road tunnels and 2 control areas, namely Chiang Control Area, TMCA, and Chingsha Control Area, TSCA in Hong Kong. Of the road tunnels, 13 are government tunnels, 2 are built, operate, and transfer tunnels, namely the Western Harbour Crossing and Thailand Tunnel. And 1 is a private tunnel, namely the Discovery Bay Tunnel. Among the government tunnels, 7 of them are tolled tunnels, including the Cross Harbour Tunnel, Eastern Harbour Crossing, Aberdeen Tunnel, Lion Rock Tunnel, Shing Mun Tunnels, Chung Wan O Tunnel, and Tate Kong Tunnel. Tolls are also collected at certain road sections within the 2 control areas, namely the Lantau Link in TMCA and the Eagle's Nest Tunnel, Sha Tin Heights Tunnel, and Tai Wai Tunnel in TSCA. All the above-mentioned tolls were effected through legislation. As for toll-free government tunnels, there are a total of 6, including the Kai Tak Tunnel, which was commissioned back in 1982, and those recently commissioned, namely the Scenic Hill Tunnel and Airport Tunnel leading to the Hong Kong port of the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, which were commissioned in October 2018, the Central and Wan Chai Bypass Tunnel commissioned in 2019 January, as well as the Long Shan Tunnel and Cheung Shan Tunnel leading to the Liantang Hung Yuen Wai boundary control point, which were commissioned last month. Our consolidated reply to the various parts of Mr. Gary Chan's question is as follows. Tolls collected account for the majority of the operating revenues of the government-tolled tunnels and the tolled sections within the 2 control areas. The government also explores and implements feasible measures to generate additional revenues, such as erecting advertisement panels at suitable locations of the tunnels and control areas so as to bring about advertising income without compromising road safety. Operating expenditures involve mainly the contract fees paid by the Transport Department to operators responsible for the management, operation, and maintenance of the tunnels and control areas. For government-built tunnels and tolled sections in the control areas, their respective operating expenditures also include the depreciation charges of the construction costs and the depreciation costs of major system replacement works. In addition to the tunnel operators' systematic checkups and routine upkeep for the tunnels, Transport Department also replaces major systems of the tunnels and tolled sections of the control areas in a timely manner after consulting the Electrical and Mechanical Services Department in order to ensure the safe, reliable, and effective operation of the tunnels and control areas. The operating revenues and expenditures of the government-tolled tunnels and the tolled sections within the 2 control areas from 2013-14 to 2017-18 are at the annex. Since the revenue and expenditure figures for 2018-19 are still being compiled, we are unable to provide the relevant information in this reply. In determining whether and at what levels the above-mentioned road tunnels and control areas should be tolled, the government has mainly adopted the cost recovery and user-pays principles and has taken into account a host of factors, including traffic management, costs, including the capital costs of provision of the relevant tunnels and roads, the toll levels of alternative routes, public affordability and acceptability, etc. To encourage more efficient use of road space so as to alleviate road traffic congestion, the government is planning to re-examine the directions and guiding principles applicable to the determination of the toll levels of all government-tolled tunnels and control areas. As stated in the Chief Executive's 2018 policy address, we propose to adopt the concept of congestion charging and the principle of efficiency first in determining the levels of tolls for different types of vehicles using tolled tunnels as well as the TMCA and TSCA so as to allocate more effectively the limited road space. The concept of congestion charging refers to the charging of different tolls according to the degree of traffic congestion of the toll tunnels, TMCA and TSCA, during different time periods, with a view to changing the travel patterns of users of the tunnels and control areas by rendering some private car drivers to switch to public transport modes or refrain from using the tunnels and road sections concerned during peak periods. As regards the principle of efficiency first, it refers to enabling efficient people carriers, such as franchise buses and vehicles that support economic activities, such as goods vehicles, to enjoy concessionary tolls, while imposing higher tolls on vehicle types with low carrying capacity, such as private cars. In this connection, the Transport Department will commence the study on congestion charging in the middle of 2019 to examine the hierarchy and levels of tolls of all government-tolled tunnels, including the Western Harbour Crossing and Thailand Tunnel, which will be taken over by the government upon franchise expiry in August 2023 and May 2025, respectively, as well as the TMCA and TSCA. To put the concept of congestion charging and the principle of efficiency first into practice, the study will also examine the scope for charging different tolls during different time periods. The government's current thinking is to set the toll levels of the toll tunnels TMCA and TSCA, primarily having regard to traffic management consideration, while also taking into account a host of other relevant factors, such as the operation costs of the tunnels, public affordability and acceptability, etc. Transport Department plans to consult relevant stakeholders, including the Legislative Council Panel on Transport, the Transport Advisory Committee, and the Transport Trades on the toll plans and toll adjustment mechanism recommended by the study in 2021. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Mr. Gary Chen. Madam Deputy, well, the Secretary spent 6 minutes to answer my questions, but he didn't answer me why 7 of the government tunnels are tolled while the remaining ones are free. Sometimes he talks about user pays principle, cost recovery, and then congestion charging, efficiency first. Well, Lion Rock Tunnel is already recovering costs, is that right? And then you need to resolve congestion, and you spend $30–40 billion on Central, Wan Chai Bypass and Longshan Tunnel, and yet you don't need to recover costs, and you don't need to maintain and upkeep the tunnels. Why are these toll-free tunnels? Well, as a directly elected member of the constituencies concerned, I understand that for all harbour crossing tunnels, these are tolled tunnels. So are you discriminating against residents living in the new territories? Would you exempt the tolls of these tunnels and bridges so that public transport and commercial drivers will have cheaper means or of using these tunnels to cross the harbour, or even make them free of charge? Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Thank you, Mr. Chan, for his questions. The government offers equal treatment to everyone, regardless of where they live. Just now, I already explained in great detail the cost of construction of tunnels and operating costs, and the principles that we adopt, that is cost recovery and user pays principles. Well, under these 2 principles, there are also other factors of consideration, such as traffic management. Well, if traffic is smooth along a certain tunnel or road, as you can see, for carriageways, we normally do not charge tolls, considering the aspect of traffic management. Whereas for tunnels, we need to consider that it is point to point, and we also need to consider traffic management. And if there is no congestion in every tunnel, if we keep them toll-free, we can consider dispensing the tolls. However, if we adjust the tolls, thereby affecting the flow of traffic and the seriousness of congestion, we need to consider otherwise, because traffic infrastructure is put in place to facilitate traveling of residents. And like I said, the Transport Department in the middle of 2019 will commence the study on congestion charging. We will examine the hierarchy and level of tolls of all government toll tunnels, and also the TMCA and TSCA, and also after Western Harbour Crossing and Thailand Tunnel, which will be taken over by the government in the future.
We will look into the problem of congestion and improving traffic management. We will come up with a set of recommendations, and then we will consult stakeholders, including the panel on transport of the Legislative Council, through a thorough and comprehensive study. And after going through the process, we can come back and consult the Council. Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Secretary mentioned that the government plans to review the levels of tolls of all tolled tunnels, having taken into account the Chief Executive's policy address delivered in 2018 and the concept of congestion charging. Well, we know at least a study will take 2 or 3 years' time to have findings. In relation to traffic congestion among the 3 harbour crossing tunnels, my question for the Secretary is, before the expiry of the franchise of Western Harbour Crossing, that is 2023, will you consider, in the small hours, lowering the tolls for the remaining cross-harbour tunnels, that is Harbour Crossing Tunnel and also or Cross Harbour Tunnel and Eastern Harbour Crossing, having considered the principle of user pays principle? Secretary, as you know, for the 3 harbour crossing tunnels, there is a discrepancy of tolls, leading to the fact that during the daytime, the CHT and the EHC are very congested. During the morning and evening peak periods, there is a serious tailback of traffic. Even for non-peak periods, unless you use CHT in Hong Kong during the small hours, basically, there is still quite a long traffic queue. So, considering traffic management, we understand that congestion at the tunnel would have implications on congestion at the vicinity road network. We need to consider comprehensively as a result. For Western Harbour Crossing, at the moment, the operator does not require the government's consent in adjusting the tolls, having considered that the existing toll levels have not reached the statutory maximum limit. Well, whether we can consider lowering the toll levels in the small hours, I would say this would have relatively a less impact on the traffic condition as a whole, because we all know there is few traffic in the small hours on the road. We understand where you're coming from, but as far as the government is concerned, we'd like to be careful and thorough. Well, the study will commence in the middle of this year, and it will be completed in 2021. We will review the situation. With toll adjustments coupled with the use of technology, we can charge different tolls during different time periods for different vehicles. So I think it would be better to draw a conclusion upon completion of the comprehensive study. We've heard Mr. Chair's views loud and clear. Mr. Michael Look. Madam Deputy, earlier, the toll adjustment levels across the 3 harbour crossing tunnels was prepared behind closed doors. It was unacceptable, and the government in the end withdrew the plan. And there is no means to address the issue of congestion at the Cross Harbour Tunnel. And for Western Harbour Crossing, the toll levels have just been adjusted upward since the 1st of June. Before the government takes over Western Harbour Crossing in 2023, does the government have any measures to alleviate traffic congestion at the 3 harbour crossing tunnels? Will the government, for example, improve the design of connecting roads so that traffic can be diverted to or away from the core areas? And will the government expand the road network, and whether the government will conduct consultation as soon as possible and to conduct a study as soon as possible in relation to the toll levels or the toll mix of Western Harbour Crossing before 2023, so as to prevent a repeat of the shelving of the plan? Secretary, at the moment, although the toll adjustment plan at the moment is put on the back burners, the government is not sitting on its laurels in terms of traffic management, resolving congestion, and departmental collaboration to keep traffic smooth. We'll continue to follow up on the matter. And as I explained just now, there are 2 BOT private tunnels. And we've also considered including these 2 private tunnels in our congestion charging study. And we will also consider paying the arrangement of paying tolls without stopping the cars, so that this can be implemented at the end of 2021. 2 or 3 years after the commissioning of Cheung Kwan O Lam Tin Tunnel, we can introduce this toll payment arrangement and then further extend the arrangement to other tunnels. We also have the plan in relation to Western Harbour Crossing and Tai Lam Tunnel. Before they are taken over by the government, we will install the facilities for non-stop toll payment at the toll booths at these 2 tunnels, working with the operator to facilitate the public. In terms of toll levels and charging different tolls during different time periods and the use of technology, all these will be taken into account. We'll examine all 16 road tunnels and 2 control areas. In terms of the traffic management, toll levels, and other arrangements. Mr. Michael Look, which part of your question hasn't been answered by the Secretary? He hasn't answered me when consultation in relation to toll adjustment of the 3 harbour crossings will be conducted before taking over the Western Harbour Crossing. Secretary, in fact, I already replied. In the middle of this year, we will commence a study on congestion charging. It will examine the hierarchy and level of tolls and also the feasibility of charging different tolls during different time periods. We have included all road tunnels. Mr. Lau Yip-kang. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Over 60% of NT residents are required to travel to work in Hong Kong and Kowloon. For any NT and also New Territory West, respectively, 490,000 and 380,000 residents need to travel to Hong Kong and Kowloon for work, coupled with 200,000 school children. And there is a suggestion to exempt the tolls for 6 tunnels so as to alleviate the burden on ordinary residents and to redistribute traffic. The government did not heed this view. I want to ask if whether the government in the short term will consider waiving the tolls for Tai Lam Tunnel so that traffic will be diverted from Fanling Highway to Tai Lam Tunnel so that we can even out the traffic in NT West and NT East. Secretary, thank you for the question. We understand the question. The traveling patterns of residents are that during morning peak hours, traffics tend to flow from north to south and vice versa during the evening peak periods. It is therefore particularly serious in terms of congestion for the 2 bounds during the times I mentioned. And we have actually implemented that in terms of government tunnels, franchise buses, tolls are subsidized by the government. As for Tai Lam Tunnel, we are working out a plan with the operator. We hope the operator will accept the government's plan in terms of a timetable for toll adjustments and the toll levels so that the government can also pay the tolls for franchise buses on their behalf so as to alleviate the financial burden or the fare burden on passengers. At the same time, the government also understands the traffic expenses for residents, and this year we introduced a subsidy program. No matter the mode of public transport, MTR buses, minibuses or ferries, they are all included in the scheme. As For Mr. Lau's suggestion whether we can exempt the tolls for all vehicles, we need to have careful consideration because there would be induced demand if we are to waive the tolls for all vehicles. Some vehicles may not necessarily need to use the tunnel. These may be private cars, the drivers of which may originally be commuters or public transport. We need to be careful about the induced demand. Dr. Low Kwok. Madam Deputy, the Secretary has given a very lengthy explanation. But in terms of the toll tunnels, the level of tolls, and the waiver of tolls, I still find the government's plan puzzling. Well, for these two highways, the Yantai-Hengyan boundary control point, well, the highways are toll-free, but they come with long tunnels. Now, for Lantau Link within Chiang Mai control area, according to the Secretary's reply, if I look at the annex, in 2017-18, the income is 637 million, and the expenditure is 322 million, meaning a $15 million of profit. Well, for those living in Lantau, this is the only link to urban districts to the new territories, Kowloon or Hong Kong, and in fact, members across the political spectrum have been requesting the government to waive the tolls. So how is the Secretary going to address the public's needs? Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Thank you, Dr. Low, for your question. It's been 20 years since the Lantau Link has been commissioned. The toll level has never been adjusted. There are different levels of tolls for different types of vehicles. In setting the levels of tolls, the government has taken into account the factors I mentioned in my main reply. We've also taken into account the points raised by Dr. Low about the information provided in the annex. We understand that the information does not include the overall construction cost for Lantau Link back then. So in terms of cost recovery and users pay principles, we do need to factor in the construction cost spent at that time in MOD prices. In any case, this is part of our public transport infrastructure. It is for the public's good. And in the congestion charging study, we will consider Lantau Link as well. So about the suggestions made by members, definitely, they will be looked into in our study in depth so that when we come back to consult the panel, we can explain to members.
That ends the question time. Members' motion on subsidiary legislation and instrument